So online with me, I got Mullah Chizek, and I found out that Mullah and some of his partners found out about a group of these mystery glyphs in 1974, I believe it was. Anyway, he had a great adventure, and I'll just turn it over to Mullah, and Mullah, tell us a little bit about how you found out about these and what you thought and all that.
Well, I guess the story begins with a man by the name of Sam Holbrook. I'm just going to mention this. His wife name was Dory, which I think was short for Dorothy. Anyway, I don't know that for sure. Anyway, some friends of his, when they had been childhood friends in Idaho, but his name was Jim Little, and he had a brother named Les. And they were into the mining industry and business.
Uh-huh.
And they had recently done a job down in outside of Kanosh, Utah. And while out surveying and taking rock samples or whatever those guys were doing, they stumbled on these symbols that had been carved into a rock. Anyway,
so do you think somebody show them to them, or did they find these on their own?
They found them on their own, according to Sam.
Cool. Okay.
So anyway, they wrote them down, and later on had told Sam about having these. Anyway, Sam was working in Tracy, California at the penitentiary there for California State Penitentiary. And my father was also there, and my dad was in charge of the medical lab there. And he had been in the correctional industry up in Idaho and had transferred down there and was living in Manteca, California. And this is in the early 60s.
Uh-huh.
And Jim, in telling the stories and showing Sam the symbols and everything, Jim Little wrote the symbols onto a postcard and sent them to Sam. And because Sam had told Jim that he had met this man by the name of Ralph Chizek, my father, that he understood a lot of ancient symbols, because my dad, during he had becoming a Baptist minister, was capable of speaking Hebrew and Greek, reading and writing it also.
Really?
Also was kind of an amateur symbols expert. Dad had done a lot of research into Phoenician and Arabic and Cretan and symbols used by navigators and all kinds of symbology, let's call it that. And so Sam offered that to Jim and his brother Les, let Ralph Chizek have a try at deciphering what the symbols would mean. So they had struck up a friendship, and I think it was 1963. I was in high school at the time. We made a trip over to San Francisco because there was a couple of books Dad knew that were in the library in San Francisco that weren't available in Stockton or in Sacramento that he wanted to consult with. So we went over there and did a lot of research in the library. I think it was 2 days, it was at least 2 days and one night that we spent going through the symbols. I'm just a teenager,
Yeah.
and those guys are, full-grown men and stuff. Anyway, I think I was a little bit of a help to my dad, and that I was looking in different books and stuff like that, and coming up for what the symbols meant. Well, anyway, so they started piecing the thing together, and what was interesting to everybody, more so than anything, was at the very top of this symbol list was what they thought, or what we thought, was either an Aztec or Mayan glyph symbol of a skull, which was, that was kind of surprising why someone would be using an Aztec or Mayan symbol all the way in southern Utah. So that began a whole, let's say, search for how anything like that could have ended up there.
Yeah.
And the other curious thing about it was that there were several of the symbols that were exact matches of ancient Phoenician symbols.
Really?
And some of those symbols were used by the Minoans living on Crete. And these people were referred to as the Sea People.
Yeah.
And religiously, a lot of people thought the Philistines were actually Sea People or Phoenicians. Anyway, they all end up in Carthage, and finally the Romans stamp them out. But the interesting thing about it was, okay, you got kind of like Phoenician symbols. They were known primarily because they were the best navigators in the world at that time, because they ran almost all of the shipping through the Mediterranean Sea from the time at their beginning. They became people that worked on ships, became navigators, this type of thing. Now you got some symbols that are, Phoenician or Grecian, and you got this Aztec symbol. How could all that be there in this one group of symbols? And another curious thing was that it seemed that the structure of the symbols, when read left to right, top to bottom, which is very kind of English oriented and also more Northern European oriented, was like it was the beginning and an end of a story, or the beginning and end of a description or an account or something like that. So it meant that it wasn't just something random that somebody had taken the time to carve into a rock.
Right.
It was done on purpose for a reason. So I know that Sam had wondered, Sam thought they were extremely ancient, and my father didn't think they were quite that ancient, as like we know that, or we assume that Phoenicians never made it to North America and those kinds of things. Well, anyway, so they made a first translation of the symbols. My dad did, and he gave it back to them. And this would be, like I said, like 1963 or 64. Well,
do you remember what that translation was, or
right off the top of my head, I don't exactly remember that.
Okay.
And I don't want to say something because until your telephone call, I haven't really looked at the symbol in years. So, I don't. And now that I've looked at them, I kind of remember what we came up with and that kind of stuff. But at that time, we didn't know. Okay.
So they must have thought it was some kind of a treasure, something? Maybe your dad did, or Sam did, huh?
Well, Sam and Jim Little thought it was a treasure map, and in his explanation and his writings that Dory actually typed for him, the Bluebird Cave, Montezuma's treasure, he thought it was this treasure that either came um, from Mexico, um, the Spanish conquest of the Aztec nation, or it was Spanish because one or two of the symbols could have been Spanish in nature also, and there were treasure stories about this. Later on, they found out that some of this had been made famous by a man by the name of Freddie Crystal, who had journeyed to Kanab, Utah, and convinced the town that there was treasure buried in the White Cliffs.
Yep, he convinced the whole town. The whole town was out there helping him dig. All the men, yep.
Yeah. Well, in fact, in my senior year of high school, my friend Greg Friddle and I went there.
Oh, really?
And we actually climbed the cliff that had the handholds and footholds in it. And we went to the spot where I believe it was just a water catchment area, but they thought maybe something was buried underneath the blocking stones or treasure down there. But the reason Greg Friddle and I went were we wanted to search for additional symbols. And we found a lot of symbols, first in the White Cliffs, and then later on in the Red Cliffs, which are further back in and higher than the White Cliffs. But those were all like kind of native Indian symbols.
Yeah.
And they're like stick figures and circles and stars and
hands and feet and
with no rhyme or reason or and of course animals of the area. Where these symbols, the ones that we're talking about and the ones that were on the postcard, are quite detailed and quite expressive and quite where you really had to have an intelligence to not only think of this symbol, but then have the willpower to go ahead and recreate it and rock somewhere.
Right.
So, based on the Freddie Crystal story, and I don't know how much of that story is true or not, but here's what I was led to believe by Sam and the group was that his story about the 300 mules and this man that was in Cortez's group of people left with an Indian princess or whatever and went north to hide the treasure of the gold before Cortez came back the second time and actually conquered the Aztecs, that they had went to their holy land or the land of their ancestors where they thought they had originated. And according to their oral history, that was somewhere in the southern United States. And that's been documented in mythology. But the mule train and the guy and the princess and all that, I don't think there's any evidence of that.
Uh-huh.
Although Freddie Crystal surely believed that.
There's a lot of people that believe that. Yep.
So another thing was there was a man that was identified as having a last name of Diaz, who was in Cortez's group, and he was a navigator on one of the 5 ships that Cortez took on his conquest of, let's call it, Mexico. And he would have known some of the Phoenician symbols. And if this was the man that fell in love with a princess or whatever, didn't agree with Cortez and left with her, then that would explain in people's minds how those Phoenician type symbols ended up there on the rock.
Uh-huh.
So all of a sudden now, with the Freddie Crystal story and these symbols showing up, everybody became kind of excited that this could be treasure.
Yeah, with them symbols, you're exactly right. That would be exciting to find them in the middle of nowhere, and with that, especially with that headpiece that kind of looks Aztec or something. You're exactly right. It would be exciting.
Yeah, and that's the direction everybody went in, believed in. Now, quite honestly, I didn't quite believe that because in our translations later on, we made a trip in 1974. My dad and I, Sam Holbrook and his wife Dory, and Jim Little made a trip to Kanosh, Utah, where the Littles had found the symbols. And in my interpretation of how you interpret the symbols, it was more of kind of a story that said, here's where we buried this man and a woman.
Ah.
And when we told that to Sam and to Jim Little, well, that had to be this guy that deserted Cortez and the princess.
Ah, okay.
Okay. So basically, the interpretation of the symbols was the skull represented a marker of death, or a grave, you might say. And the story tells about how to go from this location next to Kanosh, how to get to the place where this is at. Okay, where they were buried. Now, I'm not sure why anybody would really do that after trekking somewhat 3,000 miles from Mexico up there to leave this marker there. But,
and the marker is not on the beaten path. It's in a remote, really inaccessible, not a place you'd expect to find a marker.
Exactly. As I had described earlier to you, it's in a north-south running ravine on a east-west major canyon area. One doesn't really go up there unless you're hunting chucker deer or something like that.
Right.
But a lot of time and effort had gone into it, and that kind of gave us kind of a time frame because we didn't know what kind of tools were used to actually make the symbols. But if it was Cortez, they obviously had iron and steel for swords and
Right.
guns and stuff like that. So having a chisel would have been an easy thing.
Yep.
Well, anyway, it would explain to us how someone would be able to, make these carvings in the stone, especially having a few iron tools. Would
And
be very
these,
easy to do it because in that area around Kanash, most of the rock formations are sandstone, limestone. There's some volcanic stone in the area from ancient times, but most of it's all the cliffs and canyons, or most of it's metamorphic rock, but some indigenous rock. Well, anyway,
but also these things are carved neatly. They're not just haphazardly put in there. They were neatly, painstakingly carved in very carefully. You know.
you're right about that. It's not haphazard, and nothing like Indian symbols or
Right.
any other symbology that we had seen in any other places. And the thing was also, it was such a strange mixture. But when you talk about the detail, like they put the lines of long hair on the woman's symbol,
Mm-hmm.
where the man has none.
Yeah.
That level of detail represents a tremendous amount of thought went into these symbols, and using the wing to symbolize the covering of the box or the hole, which we believe is the stone slab that Sam Holbrook said he found in the Bluebird Cave. Well, anyway, let me tell you what happened. So we went in uh, 19. I think we went in 1973. Is when we actually made the trip, because it was pretty close to hunting season, and maybe it already started. Um, but anyway, and off of that trip, we came out and we had found the original symbols. Uh, Sam stumbled onto the original symbols, and Jim Little was helping him search different gulches because he couldn't remember exactly which one they found it in. So, but he eventually found them, and then he took all of us to them, including my dad and Dory. Went up to the symbols so we could actually uh, take a look at them. And the surprising thing was the symbols weren't so far from where we first parked our cars.
Really?
Yeah, because we parked one at the mouth of the canyon, and we took another car up, or another truck up. Yeah, it was another truck because my dad and I came over in our truck, and Sam and I went all the way up to the top of the highest point of the canyon, and there's like mountains to the north and the south, a ridge of mountains. The highest ones being on the north side. And one of the key factors in the translation of this is the cave on a ledge symbol. And so with that symbol, that's basically what we were kind of looking for, was find this cave on the ledge. And there were some areas that we could see to the north, and some areas we could see to the south that looked like they were dark spots or possible holes or caves in the cliffs there. So I went north, and Sam Holbrook went south. And we stayed out way, way too late. And then trying to get back to the original camp, which was, I don't know, it was about halfway up the canyon or whatever. Anyway, we were separated, and I didn't get back until real early the next morning to that camp. Had a miserable time
you spend the night out then, huh?
Yeah. The only thing that was kind of exciting about it was just as it was getting dusk, before it got just black, I remember coming down one ridge on kind of loose, like shale or rocks that were about all 4 or 5 inches in diameter. And every time I would step, they would kind of sparkle like you hit flint.
Really?
Yeah, and
really?
that was pretty spectacular coming down that ridge. Well, I thought that ridge was going to lead down to the road that we had come up on, but to my surprise, it didn't.
Terrible.
So I had to climb up another ridge, and by then it's pitch black, and I just kind of gave up and made a fire and decided I was going to spend the night. So early the next morning, I mean very early, like 2 a.m., 3 a.m., still dark, I catch a glint of a fire that Sam Holbrook had kept burning. Kind of as a symbol to me, or signal to me, I should say. And I made it there and met up with Sam, and we started walking back to where we had originally parked one of the trucks and finally made it out of there. And after that,
how old were you at this time?
I was 18 then.
Okay.
And in July of, that would have been 19, no, wait a minute. No, I was, when Greg Friddle and I went there looking at the Freddie Crystal trip, I was 18. In 74, I had just gotten out of the service, and I was 26 years old. I did my Vietnam journeys and stuff like that. Well, anyway, not much happened about anything until I guess, well, my father, he passed away in 2014, and in his stuff was the story of the Bluebird Cave, and what Sam had wrote the story, Montezuma's Treasure, the Bluebird Cave. And the way it describes what he found is ideally what we were actually looking for. The slabs of rock covering 2 locations, a place where we believed 2 bodies were buried, and then something else buried at the forward location in the cave. And the directions just tell you basically how to find the cave, and what to do when you get inside the cave, and how to tell if you're in the right cave. The right cave, once you've gone in a couple feet and you turn around, you should be able to see 2 mountain peaks. And if you can't, you're in the wrong cave.
Yeah. So real quickly,
yeah.
For any of those that are interested in reading a copy of that story, you care if I share it with them Anybody that wants it,
Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks.
Half the fun is the search, the journey.
Yep.
The thing is when I read the story of the Bluebird Cave. Now, I tell you what, I hadn't read this until my father died.
Ah.
I never knew that Sam had actually found that cave.
Ah.
He said he tried to contact me, but at the time I had moved to a company called Bentley, Nevada, and we put in monitoring systems on rotating machinery. And they sent me to Texas for training, and I opened the first Bentley office in Louisiana. So in that time frame that he said, or Dory said in her letter, that they were trying to get a hold of me, he probably didn't even know where I was.
Yeah.
Or how to get a hold of me. But her letter to my dad was dated 74, March 6th of 1974. So my dad had it for a long, long time and never said anything to me about it. Hopefully he had read it. But anyway, so it was Sam's intention was to go back to the cave with some tools and see what was underneath the slabs. I don't know if that ever happened or not. I was quite curious about it. I tried to locate Sam and couldn't find him or Dory or any of the little brothers. But of course, the little brothers were older than Sam, and Sam was older than my dad, and my dad had passed. So my dad passed at 88. So finding them, was fruitless.
Yeah, and I think Sam passed away in 1979.
Yeah, that's what I hear. So it wasn't very long after the 74 trip, or the letter was sent in 74. I think the trip was in 73. That would make more sense to me because I remember being out of the service about 2 years and just moving to Nevada, or actually to Sparks, Nevada at that time. Because when we went on that trip, my dad drove up from Roseville, where he was at Folsom Prison then, and picked me up, and we continued our journey across Highway 50 and then dropped down into Kanosh, Utah that way. So that's how we got there. And we came back the southern way. So we never did actually make it to Fillmore.
So I never knew this, and just till right today, till we was talking before, I always assumed this was in Fillmore, Utah, because these look like the Fillmore, Utah site. But you're telling me that you guys was in Kanosh. This was out of Kanosh, which tells me there's another side of what I call these the Mystery Glyphs. There's another side of these that I had no idea about, and now I'm pretty excited. I got to go find them.
Yeah. And it would make sense if something was very important, that you would put it in more than one location. But only if you had intended to come back.
Right.
The only thing I found kind of funny, let's say, about the symbols, according to Sam, in Sam's mind, the guy that left Cortez with the princess must have died with the princess, and those are the people that were buried in the cave.
Uh-huh.
Well, if that's true, then who carved in the symbols?
Yeah.
Because it was always assumed that the person that was carving those in was educated, intelligent, very precise, stuff
Definitely.
like that, which
Definitely
would have been the navigator.
Yeah, definitely
But
whoever carved them was that. Yeah.
yeah, so he may not have been the only person that left Cortez. We don't know. But the symbols do tell a story of the journey to that. The Death Head Aztec symbol, or the skull symbol, I believe, is basically like a grave marker for where the man and the woman are buried. What's buried in the front of the cave that's described where it narrows down, um, I have no idea what that is. Now, maybe that is more symbols to where if these people were part of that treasure group or mule team or whatever it was that went up there, maybe there's more instructions there. But the truth of the matter is, if you research Cortez and Montezuma and the taking over the Aztecs, the Spanish didn't get very much gold from the Aztecs. So a lot of people assume the reason why they didn't is it wasn't there when they came back, uh, to actually overthrow the city there. Uh, but there may not have been that much gold there to begin with, because at that time and place, uh, obsidian, especially green obsidian and jade, were more precious than gold or silver or any of that kind of stuff to them. Not to the Spanish, of course, but
Right.
to uh,
The Aztecs. Yeah.
the Aztecs. So why they would, the whole thing about the treasure train and stuff. If there was a lot of treasure and it took 300 mules to carry that and their supplies up there, I don't think it would be in one little hole in the cave where the leaders of this group
Right.
would have buried it. But there may be other instructions there, or some other evidence, or some other proof in the either in the actual burial, or in that location that says in the cave to dig down in the front of the cave. So I don't know. Kind of makes you want to go back, start all over. But I wasn't with Sam when he found the Bluebird Cave. Like I said, I was north and
Yeah.
he went south. So
that's kind of a clue then. That's kind of a clue, as he went south, and so that's the direction that the Bluebird Cave is then.
Yeah, from our vantage point where we were at, you could see the cliffs to the north and some cliffs running to the south. And that was just about at I would say, kind of the summit of the canyon. If you kept on going, you'd start heading down the other side into the next valley over to the east, which would have taken you towards the little town of Richfield from Kanash.
Uh-huh.
And, but we didn't go down. We didn't go that far. We had driven up to that point, but when we stopped to look, we were wanting to look for cliffs because we were looking for a cave on a cliff.
Right.
So that's why we stopped where we did, and where I took off to the north and he took off to the south.
Cool.
So that's basically my story.
Man, Mala, I appreciate it. And for anybody that wants to read the story that Sam Holbrook wrote about this, about you guys' adventures and what he found, he found a cave, and it's a whole nother story. You know, anybody wants to know that, email me. I'll leave my email address on here, and I'll send that to you. And thanks, Mala, for letting us share that.
All right.
Hey, Mala, I appreciate you, and that's a wrap. Thanks.
Okay, well, get lucky. Go look for the symbols.
I'm excited.
Look, cave is what you want to look. If you find them, let me know. But really, if you find the cave, let me know what you find.